Thank you for joining our special edition of Breakfast with Boyden. Today we are talking with some alumni engagement gurus. We have Erica Jordan, who is the Vice President of Alumni Engagement at Boston University, and Anita Walton, the Vice Chancellor for University Advancement and Executive Director of Elizabeth City State University Foundation. Chris Vlahos, owner of Chris Vlahos Alumni Consulting. And last, but certainly not least, Paul Clifford, the CEO of Penn State's Alumni Association. Welcome, everyone. I'm so honored to be amongst these alumni gurus. Just to sort of kick it off, I know a lot of folks have really talked COVID to death, but alumni engagement is really one area that was impacted with the after effects of COVID. And I would love to talk a little bit about how alumni engagement has changed through COVID and post-COVID, and some universities are still working through COVID right now as well. And how does this differ between small institutions versus larger institutions, and how are institutions moving forward?
I'm happy to start. I think most of us probably weren't doing virtual engagement at all, or if we were, it was in very small quantities. And really, COVID really pushed us all right into the virtual space, and having to really retrain staff and redeploy in ways that we probably would not have done in our everyday world. And so, I think COVID really did the silver lining, I guess you could say, with some of the COVID world is that, we all now are pretty proficient in living in this hybrid space where we're trying to find our way back and do some in-person events, but know that we gained a whole new audience of alumni who probably wouldn't have come to some of our programs in person, but now are still willing to engage with us virtually. So for me, and I know from my colleagues, I think, now having to look at our staffing a little differently, and think about how we ensure we have staff who can do both in person and virtual, and then maintain that for probably years to come in this virtual space. It's a whole new world and strategy I think we have to think about and develop metrics for, as well as, what does success look like moving forward in a hybrid space?
Great.
I'll jump in and say, from a small institution, for us, it actually elevated our programming, because we have really just one permanent person in alumni relations. And so when you start thinking about human and financial resources, we don't have a regional engagement team, but virtual engagement allowed us to suddenly develop regional outreach. So it was really great for us. It allowed us to connect with a number of new people. We were able to garner more information. It just kind of really elevated things for us, which is hard to believe. But that is really one of the great opportunities that we were able to take advantage of.
Great.
Go ahead, Paul. I know you want to jump in there.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that, COVID-19, and I say this with kind of all due respect to the suffering that went on around the world in relation to fighting the disease of COVID-19. But from an alumni relations perspective, and at least from a Penn State perspective, it was an opportunity for the Penn State Alumni Association to shine, right? Our athletics teams were taken off the courts back in March and weren't allowed to compete. We stopped the face-to-face visits with development officers, right? And the institution really had to lean on the relationships that we have built on behalf of our institution. And who better positioned to help activate those relationships than the Alumni Association, who's been part of building these relationships, throughout our history. And so, the saying is, never let a crisis go to waste. And we were really able to take advantage of the work from home, from people being kind of captive in their homes, looking to connect with other people. And that's that's the world we live in, is connecting Penn Staters to each other and to the university that they love. And so, as Erica was talking about, we were able to move relatively quickly, quick for higher education, I would say, into a space where we really had an opportunity to shine and connect Penn Staters through the delivery of the program services and communications that they deserve and that they desired during that period of time. And so it was really a great opportunity for alumni engagement shops to shine.
Erica, you mentioned that you really weren't doing too much digital marketing before COVID. And I kind of think back to my days when I was at Ohio State so many years ago, and we kind of joked around with this. We had this kind of this going in saying that we never want to be more than 2 years behind the current technologies. And with the COVID or the post-COVID era, you can't be 2 years behind or 1 year behind. You need to be kind of leading edge. Well, I wanted the three of you to speak first because you're actually in the trenches as working alumni directors dealing with COVID and engaging alumni. My position is a little bit different because I'm a consultant, and so I see a lot of these things. But I just wanted to add that every year when I do my annual alumni relations forecast, I speak with chief alumni officers from around the world. And Lisa, I have to tell you that your question about COVID and engaging alumni is not limited to us here in the States. Chief alumni officers in Canada, the UK, Australia are all saying basically the same kind of thing. I just, Paul, when you mentioned it's your chance to shine at Penn State, I just wanted to quote Sherry Jones from the London School of Economics, who mentioned that the power of the alumni community can truly be shown during a crisis period, right? And she said, what alumni engagement can offer at this time may be the once in a decade opportunity to show high value outcomes to the institution and to the community. Very eloquent way of saying what I think we've all been saying, that we haven't wasted this crisis. We've really shined during it, and much more to come.
Absolutely. Those were all amazing thoughts. Thank you. Anita, I want to jump off of one item you just mentioned. You talked about metrics, and metrics are so important in advancement. And sometimes we hear those metrics with gift officers and alumni engagement. And thinking about metrics, I know that it certainly affects programming and the success. And often we hear it related to things like participation rate. But there are so many other facets, of metrics. Maybe you can talk a little bit about metrics in your institution and how that sort of plays out with alumni engagement and going into advancement as well.
Okay. Well, I can definitely do that, considering that our organization is one that has the engagement piece and consider, I guess, fundraising, if you will, kind of tied together, like we're not really able to separate them at all. We've had to actually think about what it is that we want to measure. To be quite honest, the COVID gave us an opportunity to grow our engagement opportunities. We were very limited because of limited staff, but then we started counting things like readership and communication metrics. We were doing some engagement with social media, but not a lot. It also helped us to determine who it is that we should be looking at, considering in terms of moving folks along in our qualification process and cultivation as well. And so for us, we were trying to do both and at the same time, right? How do we reach people, our alumni and friends, and talk with them, get them engaged, and at the same time, try to measure that against our ROI for our fundraising efforts, right? We've certainly used the metrics to do some benchmarking, like everyone else, goal setting, and to demonstrate that we need our financial need for program growth and development. So all of our decisions, our efforts, how we prioritize our work has really been metrics driven. We are able to say that our reach in terms of alumni engagement has increased significantly. Individuals who would not come to campus just will get on a Zoom call with us to engage very easily. Our institution, too, has always had a great divide with demographics as it relates to age. And we found now that we've been able to bridge that, and we don't have to think about how do we serve young alumni, how do we serve our more seasoned alumni. I think people are excited to see an increase in programming and an increase in how we are connecting programming to our fundraising efforts. And if I can, I know I've been talking a lot, just a quick example. We were able to have a program where we had an evening with each of our deans, and they invited their chairs and students, however they wanted to do that. Each school was very different, but we followed that up like a month later with an actual appeal connected to those evenings and some of the information that they talked about. So, we are able to measure and capture who's participating in our Zoom calls, and then kind of leveraging that to continue the conversation again in the cultivation and qualification process.
Anita, I love how you framed the use of metrics. You didn't use the word counting, you used the word measuring. And there's a big difference between counting and measuring. Measuring is much more strategic. It's not enough just to say we had 25 people at an event. What are you doing strategically with that? And furthermore, to your point, you talked about return on investment. I prefer to use the word return on engagement, but it's really the same thing. I mean, we're all in the business of engagement, but you have to ask that question, to what end? What is the intentionality? What is the purpose? And you don't know that you've succeeded really until you measure those outcomes tied to what your strategy is.
And I just, I think another example, I think Anita and Chris are spot on. I think one that I'll bring up is this, that I've had the pleasure of serving now 2 institutions within the pandemic. At UC Irvine, when we launched our campaign literally a year before the pandemic, which was its own challenge. We started off with a dual goal. So we had a financial goal, but we decided to move forward with an alumni engagement goal, which, there was definitely some peer institutions who had, taken stabs at that, Chicago and Marquette and some others, and we all were doing it a little differently. At Irvine, we had already had a point system to count different levels for different engagement activities, but we realized that wasn't really a great outwardly externally focused goal. So we did kind of have a count, to Chris's point, of the number of alums we wanted to engage during the life of the campaign, but we maintained our point system to allow us to look at stewardship opportunities. So every year that reset itself, we could look back, at fiscal year 19 or 20 and say, if we had, 10,000 alums engage around, this point structure, but only 5,000 were kind of mid-year, who are those people? How are we engaging them? How are we ensuring that they come back into the mix, whether it's giving or attending something? And so I think as we're looking at alumni engagement as a whole, I think there's a lot of ways we can build in metrics for ourselves, not only metrics, but stewardship, strategy, and really be great partners to our development colleagues if we don't own AO giving or kind of the pipeline within our own shops.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add was just before CASE rolled out their standardized metrics for alumni relations that I think have been in place for about 3 years now. We developed what we call our RIPS model at the Penn State Alumni Association. And RIPS, it's an acronym. It stands for Revenue, Improvement, Participation, and Satisfaction. And we have targets in each of those 4 areas that we try to hit on an annual basis. Certainly revenue, I think, speaks for itself, right? But it's a qualitative measure as well, right? If people are attending your events, if people are joining, if they're being philanthropic, right? That revenue number is gonna rise and be driven by those things. The I stands for improvement. And so those are the 3 or 4 improvement projects that we are really intentional about on an annual basis, right? You all know these projects as those projects that we have on our wish list that don't have a deadline, that at the end of the year, we keep pushing off and don't get to because of the other deadline driven things. We've made that part of our annual metrics and evaluations, that we actually accomplish those 4 or 5 or however many projects are in the improvement area, so that we do carve out the time to improve as an organization. P is participation, right? And that includes readership, it includes event attendance, it includes engagement through social media, which there's heavy overlap with the case model there. And then the final measure is a qualitative measure. It's a satisfaction rating based on the question that we ask: would you recommend fill in the blank to a fellow Penn Stater, right? It's would you recommend reading the Penn Stater magazine, attending this event, using this service? And that gives us a qualitative measure on a scale of 5, where we try to hit 4.5 on everything that we do in terms of the satisfaction rating that we're trying to achieve. The main, I think, benefit to us using this RIPS model is that we've committed to tracking all of this in our central database, which we hadn't been before. So now all revenue is tracked in there, all participation is tracked in there. And so it gives a great snapshot to our partners across the advancement world here at Penn State in terms of how we're engaging Penn Staters.
Lisa, what Erica, Anita, and Paul have just said when it comes to strategy and measuring and so forth, what they're really doing is elevating the role of alumni engagement at their institutions, right? Because if you don't think about this from a strategic standpoint and you can't measure your performance, then what are you left with? You're left with the perception that you are event planners, you are party planners. I don't want to say the F word. Well, okay, friend raisers. We're better than that. We didn't have to have this discussion 10, 15 years ago, but the world has changed. And when you elevate the profile of what you're doing, you're really demonstrating that alumni engagement is an asset that is vital to the institution's success. And this is really, I don't think we have any future but that as we move forward. So the issue of metrics, again, is not just counting. It's not just measuring. It's really positioning the impact of what you're doing.
And Anita said it in her answer earlier, right? She said, I really can't separate the fundraising from the engagement, and nor should you be able to now if you're running a modern alumni association, right? That's part of what, a characteristic of a modern alumni association is to see the full picture of the alumni experience and recognize that there are outcomes that we're driving towards, right? Philanthropy is an outcome, advocacy is an outcome, participation, joining, right? And so if we ignore some of those outcomes, then we're an alumni program that's on the sidelines, begging to be at the table, but not doing the things that you need to do to actually have a seat at that table.
Absolutely. And Paul, I would even add to that not only would we be looking to sit at the table, but unfortunately for those schools who fail to kind of move into the 21st century, their next campaigns, you can already start to see some of the universities that are having these gaps in their pipelines. And to me, part of that is their misunderstanding of what alumni relations and engagement, partnerships, and, kind of making a cohesive partnership, I guess, really means to the pipeline. And I think it's not almost less about us being at the table as more so them at our table.
Yeah, I work with a lot of alumni boards that are very nervous and anxious when it comes to, you have to promote a spirit of philanthropy and understand what that means. I work with a lot of old school alumni directors. Many of you know them, who are very uncomfortable with this idea. You mean we have to put pledge cards on the tables at events? No, it's not about that. It's about inspiring engagement. And we know that there's a direct correlation between engagement and giving. But Paul, you're spot on. I'm so glad, Lisa, that we're recording this, because you will be on the sidelines. I mean, we're talking about very contemporary, modern alumni offices, alumni engagement functions. And 10 years ago, we were not exactly known for being leading edge, right? But we don't have a choice these days.
Yeah, I was thinking about this as you all were talking. It's almost as if, we, the word alumni relations versus alumni engagement, right? Just the change in terminology, in a way, has elevated the role of alumni relations at the overall advancement table. Changing to engagement, something that clearly is more comprehensive, more I think it speaks to greater collaboration, the diversity of ways that we can engage. And it's not just the party planning, not just the event planning, not just the how do we get these people doing something for the institution so that they are showing some school spirit, if you will.
Yeah, and I'd like to say, like, I like to think of the shift between relations to engagement is it almost becomes a two-way relationship with our alums that in some ways I think the older school way of doing things was, yeah, let's divide the country up. We're going to do events in these places. Boom, bam, we have this great number of events we've done. Yay. Now we're really thinking about, again, all the digital, virtual, all the other pieces that go along with it. But where's that two-way relationship? You know, mentor programs are so much more robust because we're doing them virtually. Even our chapters and clubs, they're just a different space and we're able to build global networks in a much different way. And so to me, it's really about ensuring that our alums know they have a role in making us who we are and engaging in a different way than they could have before.
Well, let me take it a step further. So forgive me, Paul. So we're talking about alumni relations becoming alumni engagement. I'm hearing something a little bit different. I'm now hearing the phrase alumni and donor engagement. Because of this intentionality that Paul was talking about and this alignment that we're all speaking of. In fact, I had one client say, why don't we just call it donor engagement? I said, I'm not ready for that. It's okay. Let's keep the word alumni in there. But I'm seeing a lot of this alumni and donor engagement mentality these days.
Yeah. And look, I think it's a shift from, relationship, right? Which is a noun and is passive, to engagement, which is it's an active, it's a verb, right? It's something that we're intentional about. There's strategy behind it because we're trying to drive to many outcomes, right? One of those outcomes being philanthropy. And Chris, this is where I might push back and sound a little old school in that alumni need to be part of that definition forever, right? Because alumni, can make contributions to an institution, may make many contributions to an institution before philanthropy becomes one of those contributions, right? In terms of advocacy or mentoring or helping provide, jobs for new graduates. And so, I think alumni is kind of the consistent part of that alumni engagement, some of which happen to be donors and some donors of which happen to not be alumni. We're seeing that trend across the country now, right? Where, I'll quote something that I believe to be true. And if I'm wrong, I apologize. But the University of Washington up in Seattle now, I think counts more non-alumni donors on an annual basis than they have as alumni donors, right? Certainly not the case here at Penn State quite yet, but that's a trend that we're seeing across the country where institutions are engaging communities and industry at such a level that it's actually becoming greater supporters than the alumni base of that institution.
Yeah, there are many more non-University of Arizona donors in Tucson than there are U of A donors. And a lot of it is that here in Tucson, Paul, a lot of people retire, maybe not so much in State College, but that's understandable. But seriously, we have a lot of retirees here who support the athletics and the arts and all the programming. And so we have this dynamic where so many donors are not alumni of the institution, and yet they're also giving back to their own institution. So just a very interesting dynamic.
I just wanted to add I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Anita.
Yeah, I just wanted to add an example, a very specific example, Paul, to your comment about alumni being engaged in giving to the institution in a way that a donor can't. So as a small regional institution, student recruitment is critical to our success, the growth of our enrollment. And one of the top priorities of our Alumni Association is to really be super involved and engaged in that effort. That's probably an area that they spend a lot of time talking about in terms of how they can attract students to this very small regional institution based on their experience and the outcomes that they've had in their own lives, and that is priceless. I don't know that we can pay enough people to say, you need to consider Elizabeth City State University. And I would say it definitely has been impactful and the results are there. I mean, we grew 13% last year in the pandemic. And this year we continued that growth when all of our peers in the UNC system didn't necessarily do the same. So that is a very specific example that speaks to what you were talking about.
Lisa, it seems like you have lost all control of this conversation, but I think we are hitting the major points that you wanted to talk about. I did want to jump in though and kind of reference how it's cyclical in many ways too, right? If we think back to all the institutions that we have collectively served, throughout our careers, alumni relations and alumni development, if you will, fundraising at our institutions, in most cases were started by the Alumni Relations Office, right? Or the Alumni Association started fundraising at the institutions, right? And then over time, the concept of development and the professionalization of development came on our industry, right? And now we're just kind of circling back to a point where now alumni relations is once again expected to be part of the fundraising endeavor, right? So this isn't something new to our profession. It is something that we at some point maybe, I don't want to say abdicated, but maybe cut off from what we considered alumni relations. And now it's kind of coming back, full circle to be part of what the basic expectation of being an alumni professional means.
Well, go ahead.
Paul, I have to ask you a question. I mean, you run the largest dues-supported alumni engagement program in the country.
Yeah.
Back when I was at Ohio State, independent dues-supported, the marketing and the branding of it was all about join the Alumni Association, pay your dues, get benefits, very much a transaction. And you still charge dues, right? It's very important to your mission, your funding model. But yet you have switched, if I'm not correct, not switched, but evolved to it's more than paying dues. It's about supporting Penn State. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, we think dues is a great entry point into supporting the institution. So much like the annual fund, which you can be very more focused and specific on your support, one of the ways that we position membership in the Alumni Association is join an organization that supports all that you love at Penn State. So we're not trying to build loyalty with the Alumni Association per se. We're trying to connect Penn Staters to what they love most about Penn State, right? If we were to do a survey of graduating seniors, ask them, list the top 10 things you love about your alma mater. As much as it breaks my heart, the Alumni Association doesn't make that top 10 list, right?
Right.
And so our job really isn't to connect them with the association. It's to connect them with the things that do make their top 10 list and do that in a way that makes them feel good about their Alumni Association membership. And so that's why we talk about the impact of membership on the institution versus the benefits that you receive from joining.
Excellent. Thank you.
Excellent. You have all touched on so many different areas. And one thing I don't think we touched on was sort of culture. How do you really instill culture and tradition within your different roles within alumni relations? Because each institution has its own unique culture and its own set of traditions while also trying to move forward as well.
Well, I would say, I think for me, serving at different types of institution through my career, right? Elizabeth City State University is a HBCU, which is known for some very unique aspects of the culture in terms of its commitment to educational attainment. It's a level of inclusiveness in terms of making the shift for many people in their socioeconomic status, as well as this legacy of individuals from those who are first generation to those who are 25th or 5th in their family to have graduated from the institution. And so what I always try to remind team members as I bring them in and we begin to work and try to understand the institution is that our role is to overlay, take our best practice and overlay it with the culture. right? Because we're not going to be able to, we know what is supposed to happen sometimes, but we have to take into account institutional culture, influencers. I mean, we all have to do this, but at a smaller regional institution where people are very much hands-on, influencers, what has been the practice in terms of how we got from here to here, right? As we make shifts in putting things, particularly best practice in place, who are we including and who are we excluding, right? So that best practice overlaying institutional culture is so critical to the success of our program, of our fundraising, all of those things.
Excellent.
Lisa, I spent a lot of time assisting universities with strategic plans, 5-year, 10-year, long-ranging plans. At the end of the day, a plan is just a document, right? We spent a lot of time doing the plan, getting stakeholder input, and I produced a report. But the magic of a strategic plan goes back to what Anita just said. It's all about culture. And do you have the people in the room who understand not just the mission of the organization, but what do they have kind of inside? And this really goes kind of to a recruitment issue, right? It's not just the job description. It's, do they come to work every day with the hunger and the motivation to be great? Right? Do they speak to their colleagues? Do they read the trades? Do they go to conferences? Do they just inhale the changes that are going on in this field? It's really a culture of excellence that you as chief alumni officers can build. And I see this all the time. It's easy to come into work every day and just look at what's right in front of you, right? You do the event, check it off the list, move on to the next thing. But culture is really what makes the organization what it is.
I think, I like the word nimble. I use it a lot with my team. There's things that we have to do. They're traditions, they're tried and true. And we're going to always do them for as long as they make sense for us to do. But, I try to give the team a chance to say, and I love Paul's, I think he talked about improvements, or if you look at improvements or just things that, what are the things for the year that we're gonna give it a shot. I have a pot of budget. We're going to give it a shot. If it works, great. We'll do it again. If it doesn't work, we've done it. And I think it does give people on the team a chance to bring forward ideas and really rally the rest of the team and our boards and other stakeholders around some things that are just unique. One thing that we did at UC Irvine was this big ideas challenge at the university. It set us up for the campaign, but our teams really rallied around it. And I think, it's one of those things where if you're not giving your team the chance to, I think we all love to ideate ourselves, and, we bring great things forward, and in our senior leadership team, the same. But, I really, in terms of culture, try to get the team as a whole to really start bubbling up ideas and really testing those things. And so I think as much as we can empower our teams to ideate with us and bring up ideas, that's how we stay fresh. That's how we stay young and start building new traditions forward.
Yeah, if I'm being a little vulnerable and transparent here, some of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career have been not fully understanding the culture of the organization that I'm serving before I start running forward, right? And I think of, like, just to give an example of the last 2 organizations I've served, right? I was at the University of Oregon for a couple of years before coming to Penn State. You can't find culturally 2 different organizations. Like, if you put the cultural spectrum, University of Oregon's way over here and Penn State's over here, right? The tradition at the University of Oregon was, if you're not changing constantly, then you're you won't fit in here, right? That's our tradition is change. We don't have traditions here. We're constantly iterating and changing and moving forward. Now, at Penn State's also a progressive institution, but change happens here in a much different way, right? We hold tightly our traditions and our heritage to our vest. And so it's really understanding how to affect change in the situation that you're in, and what the culture is that allows you to affect that change in a lot easier way, a less painful way, right? I think of the analogy of Major League Baseball, for example, right? Alumni relations is a 19th century invention, right? Baseball is a 19th century invention. The folks who invented baseball, right? There were bases, there was a bat, there was a ball, there were 9 on each side. right? And then over time, we started to put things like the designated hitter in place. And we put lights in our stadium so that we could play at night so more people can come to see the game, right? They started to put the games on television. Did I say designated hitter? That's the one rule that I hate that they've added to baseball, but they've put the designated hitter in. They've brought the fences in, right? So that there's more offense and more home runs. And yet today in 2021, if the inventors of baseball showed up at a game, they'd be able to recognize what they're watching, right? It's certainly different and it is iterated and changed over time, but it has maintained the integrity that they started out with back in the late 1800s. How do we do that with our alumni programs, right? How do we evolve our alumni programs so that those who founded our associations back at the founding of our institutions recognize what we're trying to do today? And if you do that in ways that align with the culture of your institution, people are going to recognize and respond. But you have to continue to evolve over time, or else you become irrelevant. And that's something that none of our alumni shops want to be deemed.
Yeah. Paul, as you've said that, I think that's a great example of how you can combine the use of metrics along with, I've used metrics to say, here's the direction we should be going, even though this is what we're doing and this is what we've enjoyed, right? If we could add this or that by measurement and showing the data, it's been easier to move things forward. So I think about that from a very modern perspective, but then I also think about my own roots. And I learned this from one of my very early mentors. And he used to say, if they build it, they will come. So including the right people from the tradition and culture perspective will help to ensure that as you're making that shift based on whatever you're measuring, your comparison, cutting edge, whatever, but including those folks as well will ensure that you are able to retain that culture and tradition.
Absolutely. Well, this was such an amazing conversation. Erica, Anita, Chris, Paul, thank you so much. I think I could have listened to all of you talk for hours. So I'm so honored to have been a part of this conversation. And I thank you all so much for being a part of Breakfast with Boyden.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa.